So hello, yeah, as Lorenzo said, I'm Pat. This is a lovely chat about game zines at Amaze 2016 on a lot of sofas, featuring a lot of lovely folks. That wasn't the original title for this talk. Lorenzo only allowed me to do this I only let him change the name of the talk if I was allowed to moan about him changing the name of the talk. Originally it was going to be called that. Set from Kanye West's tweet from a few weeks ago, moaning about people who pronounce zine. But he was like, no, the title should actually say what the talk's about. So yeah, as he said, these are the people on the panel. I'm very tired. I'm going to ramble a lot. I'm sorry. So yeah, as he said, these are the people on the panel. We're going to do kind of like, I don't want to say micro talks or hyper talks or whatever, just kind of like before we get into paneling.
That's a legit verb. I approve that verb.
We're going to get, each of the people on the panel is going to kind of give a really short kind of introduction to themselves, their work, their zines they make, which you can see some stacked up in various places around us. So yeah, but before that, I'm going to do a kind of quick kind of overview about zines, I guess, and why I like them. So yeah, my name's Pat, as I've said several times. I've made several zines. I made the Games for People zine with George Buckingham, which is a good zine. I made this zine, which like no one bought because it's like a zine, but it's also like a theatre program, and it's got essays in about games as well, but it's mostly just like pictures of some stuff that was at an event. So you can have one of these if you want. I've got like 5 with me. You can have them. So yeah, zines are like, they kind of traditionally come from kind of fanzines and radical politics and, things like the Riot Girl scene, the punk scene, ways of people expressing opinions from outside the mainstream, documenting things which should otherwise not be documented, and like they have been around in video games for as long as video games have been a thing as well, from stuff like, I don't actually own any of these because they're weird, but like the 2600 Connection newsletter, which was a load of Atari people said newsletters back and forth about their Ataris and why they were good. And then moving on to people like the Game Freak zine, which was, I do own this one. Like a lot of these pictures are also just off my Instagram, so admire the great filters. So yeah, the Game Freak zine was made by the company Game Freak before they started making video games and made Pokemon, like things like Scroll. There's a zine about speedrunning, Fort 90, which is run by Matt Hawkins from New York. These zines, Pink Bullets, I don't know how to pronounce that because it's in Irish, I think, isn't it? It's about Dark Souls. No, that one's about Dark Souls. That one's about Gone Home. One Up Magazine. Oh no, I'll put more in. But yeah, basically zines are a kind of really amazing way of encapsulating movements and moments and protecting things that wouldn't otherwise be documented, but also ways of artists and writers to express themselves quickly, to share their work in kind of a slightly, I don't know, I was about to say something, but I've realized I disagree with myself before I said it. Just ways of artists sharing ways in like a more corporeal form. Let's just use that word. So yeah, that's kind of why I find zines interesting. And then we'll move on to Hannah, and Hannah's going to quickly talk about her work and what she does.
How quickly?
Like 5 minutes, up to 5 minutes.
All right. I'm really struggling to... I live with Pat, he's my housemate, and one of my best friends, and I'm really struggling to not heckle him, because at the moment he's in a position where he should definitely be chairing, and just occasionally if that one slips out, like, that's what's happened.
I'll kick you off the panel.
But yeah. So my mic is also slightly louder than yours, I feel. No. Okay. So I wrote some notes. What did I write? So I make zines primarily. I'm gonna make you model them in a second, actually. Okay. I was chatting actually to Paul last night about being on this panel, and we were like, I make zines, but I kind of feel like I'm not responding to the like cultural aesthetic zine. like the occurrence zine, because like I'm super into punk. I'm part of like British DIY punk scenes that I review for online zines, which is a kind of a weird thing that sprung out of it. But like, so what I make, I would call self-publishing, and that has an even longer history that goes back to pamphlets and political pieces of material that were printed and handed out in the streets. I'm kind of interested in like not having to pass through a publisher, and it's not like I don't have access to publishers. I've got a book coming out in May which is published by someone proper.
Good plug.
I will now not tell you the title. I think it's just called Hannah Nicklin Collected Works or something. Actually, I don't know what the title is.
It's published by Oberon Books.
It's published by Oberon Books. And, but so I'm much more interested in the speed at which you can get something out. The first one I did, Pat's now going to hold up, is Games We've Known and Loved, which was based on a performance game that I did at Gamecity, where I collected stories of games that people have enjoyed and loved. Some people are nodding because they were people I collected stories from. You were great. Someone would come into a room, there'd be a list of titles laid out on a table. You picked a title, I told you the story of a game or piece of play that was important to someone from childhood. It didn't have to be a video game, it could be a childhood game. And you would take that story away with you and you would leave a story in return. And I did a piece of spoken word at the end of Gamecity, sort of stringing all of those exchanges together. And that was the first scene that I put out. And suddenly I'd written it and everyone was going, talking about how it had... it had been important to them that their story had been said out loud in amongst some others. And I thought, well, I'd really like to just give you the script, but maybe I should just publish a zine of it. So I got a friend to do some illustrations, and I put it in the book, and at the end, there's a little bit of stuff about how you can tell your own story, and there's some blank pages at the end for you to write yours in, because I like things like that. And thereafter, it was a nice little snap to go, oh, wait, I can just put something out. It'll take me a week. And then I can print it. That'll take another bit of time. I'll sell it for £2 or £3 so that I don't make a complete loss, because I'm quite poor in a middle class way, I guess. That's the same for Selfie, which is just some of my bits of poems, including some game poems, and mostly they're poems about cycling, though. And then the final one actually is a bit of a step up from that, in that it's actually quite a nice bookish feeling thing, which is a collection of my writings on a psychogeography of games, about how place and space affects the game design of game designers I like. And all of them were just like, I have these things I want to say, and I kind of want to say them in a way which is nice and presentable and you can hold in your hands, and that reads differently to the way that it reads on the internet, because you can do different things in a book. You can use layout and fonts, and they're a different form, they're a different way of communicating a thing. They cross into different parts of our lives. So I guess I'm super into the aesthetics of zines, the punk form, but I think my self-publishing maybe keys more into a pamphlet history, which is interesting in and of itself. Is that enough talking, Pat? Yeah. Cool.
Okay. Next is Paul. He's going to talk about his work.
Okay, good. So, hi, I'm Paul. I won't have enough things to say to talk as long as Hannah did, but basically I make video games. I'm still a student, but I made a lot of games on my own. And it's been a long time since I've not done anything physical, and making zines was for me a way to come back to that, because I feel like there's some echo in there. But I used to, before I went into video games, so like before high school, I was a lot into like making all of these like crafting things, origami, pottery, like anything that was with creative crafting, basically. And making things was a way to come back to that in a way that was accessible with little materials, like just paper and a printer, and then some needles and whatever. And I'm really interested more than into, like, just like you, I don't have really ties to the zine like culture. I'm more like interested in the crafting and in the material, exploring the form and the material of zines specifically. And the content of my zines is either screenshots of editor, like in-editor screenshots of my games, so like with gizmos and wireframes and stuff like that, or pictures I found on the public the Public Climate Agency of America has all these pictures on a free server, and I just went like, I like some of these pictures, I'm gonna put them in a zine and make it a thing. So I'm just interested in like picking all these tiny pictures I like and removing the context for them in a way to make them more like obviously objects to see than accidents. Like, you know, when you look at an editor screenshot, there's some beauty in it, but if you see like the layout around it, you're like, oh, that's an editor screenshot, that's not the interesting part of the game. But then if you remove all that context and just show the picture itself, it's like, oh, it's an interesting picture, and I like it, and that's why I make those zines. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say about that.
So next is Arnaud. If you just click, it should progress that one.
Oh, you can
Or do you want me
change
to
them
click
randomly.
for you? I'll just change randomly. Okay, because Arnaud's got slides.
So,
He's professional.
Pico 8 Zine, I started last year because I discovered the Pico 8 console with a fantasy console. So just this is kind of strange. It's like a virtual console who look like, the game we are done with look pretty much like a NES game. But when I started looking on it, I was very attracted by this virtual fantasy console, but not understanding nothing. So I was asking what was the best way to have a manual for it. So I asked people to make the manual. And the manual for this console became the first zine. What is interesting is that in the zine is I pretty much I'm not doing nothing. The only thing I'm doing is editing and asking people to write articles for it. What I like is I don't know any personally the people who wrote on it. I got article for, here you can see the authors. There are a lot of them. I've done 4 zines. The first one was just like the manual. The second zine was like without any specific subject. The third one was about multiplayer games, and the last one about roguelike. In the first one, there were a lot of coding, like 90% of coding and maybe 10% of game design. And now I try to have 90% of game design and 10% of coding. The zine has been used in a lot of workshops around the world, in Spain, in Canada, in Japan, to learn to people coding and getting into game design. And that's pretty much what I have to say about that, I think. Yeah, and a lot of pictures.
Oh, sweet.
Llaura.
Oh, this is like all my stuff that like I sent to Pat, I think. Pat is probably one of the very few people in the world who has any of this stuff, I think, but he is a very eager and great collector. So I'm coming from a perspective of probably a bit rougher and readier than a lot of like the nice books and stuff that Hannah has made and other people. I discovered the joy of using a photocopier and just like pulling all this like stuff on top of the photocopier, hitting copy, and then folding it into like a tiny booklet, which is very badly folded, but everyone's is the same. Also, here's a secret, which I think sometimes backfires, but if you get scissors, you can cut the edges off your little like folded piece of paper, and it looks like it's like more pro, because then it's all like not sticking out in different points. But yeah, like kind of what Hannah said as well, like I love the speed and the idea that I get to press and like congeal this idea into a thing and like give it to people without having to spend, you know, like 500 people working like in 3 studios around the world to create whatever. And it can be just like a perfect representation of an idea. Like just earlier today, actually, Siobhan Gibson was pitching me her new zine idea, which was fantastic, which was a collection of the instructions that pet owners leave to other people to look after their pets and putting those together into a zine. And then maybe also getting people to draw what they think the animals look like based off that, you know? And that's like a perfect kind of come together of an idea. And so I started getting involved like 2 years ago in these different kind of zine meetups in Dublin. And what was really cool, like kind of, I mean, you got, some of you, hello again, like you saw my talk hopefully. all these people from very, very different backgrounds and interests and stuff. And here I was with my like paper CD covers for Curtain and paper CD covers for games like Train Song and stuff, trying to sell them video games. And they're like, I didn't know people still made video games. I didn't know like an individual could make a video game. They were very like, it was like this dark magic act that I kind of had passed on to them. And some of them bought them out of pity, which was nice. I couldn't be like, this game won an award at a maze. You should like take me seriously. But that was like really nice and refreshing, and I got like to hear like the cool creative stuff like they were doing and seeing. And actually, there was like one person who you can also see Thrin's zine there. When one person did approach me last year and said, "I also make video game zines," I was like, "Oh wow, okay." And I did not believe them until they showed me, and it was awesome. So check out Thrin Henderson's Meander zine. And for me, it was a way to take a lot of these games that I'd made and make them physical and real. So again, I made 3 video game zines, or 3 video game physical copies, which were Curtain, and I got a friend to do like lovely art. She hadn't even played the game. I kind of just like described it to her, and she drew what it reminded her of. And she gave me this amazing drawing of like, I think she also lived in Scotland, and she had this kind of hard time, and all she could remember, she's an architect. All she could remember was the design of the roof and like the lamp and stuff, and she would stare at it. So that's the cover of Curtain. And then we worked on the cover for Train Song, these kind of trains and passengers. And then also, Pat Ashe has a copy of like my selected stories. So like Twine games, which are unreleased everywhere, and like short stories and stuff I've written when I put together also. And then so that was the first year. And then the following year, I got more into like the photocopying and making stuff quickly. So I made like art with How to Be a Great Artist and like pulled it all together, which was really fun. But one thing which, to kind of like to pull this together, the reason why I got into zines in the first place like 2.5 years ago was actually from a video game creator. Even though this was a community like where it was like, again, it was like totally in this completely different environment completely. I actually discovered the zine community through if you find these threads, follow these threads, but I discovered them through the Catamites. So the Catamites is this very mysterious games creator who I think is like one of the greatest writers like ever, and they make really cool stuff, and they live a kind of nomadic, mysterious existence, and their zines I think are some of like definitely the most highly prized of the ones I've seen. They kind of fall into a similar thing where there's this kind of sense of mystery that when you open the kind of handful of CD case, you don't know what you're going to get. And he for like his game and Winter Lake's game, like Goblet Grotto, so this is the first kind of game zine I had seen. They had like made maps and their own fanzines and their own cheat codes, and they created a culture on their game that didn't like previously exist. And it was a very mysterious thing. And then recently, he made some more zines last year for his games, 50 Short Games. And I think what's really interesting about that is you can see in his work, like in his video games themselves, this kind of zine and kind of like DIY attitude where he's like, not only in their creation are they pulled together from all these different sources and kind of like the life in them is still there because of their roughness. Also, he has this kind of compendiumness thing that I like so much, where he released 50 Short Games and also musical mixtape, which is like 10 song-based video games. So yeah, I think making zines not only kind of like was an interesting culture that allowed me to like I feel like I went to like India on my gap year, and I'm like telling about all this like stuff. No, not only was it all these like cool, awesome people that I met who were super inspiring to me, who had no clue about video games, which was like so refreshing and interesting, but also bringing back into my own games, it kind of made me approach and think about things like very, very differently. And if you get a chance to like use a photocopier, like do that because it's really fun. Thank you.
Cool. So that's everyone on the panel and their kind of vague opinions. Not vague opinions. I mean, like opinions around. Oh God, I'm just gonna keep saying I'm so tired every now and again. I've got a coffee. Look, it's fine.
Put a slide in every 5 minutes.
Because now it's the panel-y bit. I don't know, panels. I don't really do panels. That's why I kind of said yes, because I kind of usually skip panels, and so I thought it'd be fun to find out what they were like from this side.
The couch is really comfy.
It's kind of terrifying. So I've kind of got to respond to everything you said and ask you questions. Let me sit like this. I think that I kind of got from all of your kind of chat there which I found really interesting was, and kind of Llaura touched on it quite a bit there with the Catamites stuff, is the kind of use of zines as a way of like pushing the boundaries of a work further than it started. So, you know, the kind of like with the games we've known and loved was a performance piece, and you've kind of made it a bigger thing, and the Catamites took bits of 50 Short Games and expanded them and worked on them, and Pico 8, don't know where I'm going at the moment. Pico 8, you know, it's like, it's about the community and building that and, you know, working on a bigger thing together. And what's your opinions on that? I guess. Who's got thoughts on that about, you know, the use of zines as a way of like bridging to other mediums and kind of exploring your own work through other lenses?
I mean, it's really cool as well when people take your work and kind of go further with it and create their own culture and stuff around it. You know, you're creating a thing which is no longer yours. It's something that other people kind of build upon and create and everything with. Like for me, like starting to make like the zines was really nice. First of all, to have a physical version of it, you know, to be something I can touch and stuff, and to create this other like perspective, like by this other kind of artist and stuff on what the game could possibly be. But then also for other people and kind of like game zine culture and stuff in general, it's so interesting to see like people build upon that and like exactly like you said, I'm kind of repeating it, but yeah, creating like making the work more than just like what's in the screen, because obviously like the work is like everything around it, which is super interesting.
I put my hand up just. I want to talk about. I don't want to talk about my work. I want to talk about Llaura and Paul's work. I'm sorry, I haven't read the PK zine, but it sounds exciting. In that, what excites me about Paul's tiny zines and about Laura's work is in zines is that. So I have this. I'm kind of bored of myself, right? I have this I'm very serious. I take things seriously. I produce some very serious zines, And I've always felt like I could never quite, like, I felt I would just be parodying the, like, Riot Girl style if I were to, like, do some photocopying and cut out some words and stuff. Like, it's not my aesthetic. And so, like, I kind of pursued my aesthetic, and my aesthetic's kind of boring. What's really exciting about these guys is that they've made things which don't look like zines I've seen before, and they're not how I imagine a zine, and that's what's really exciting about their stuff, is that it, and in that way that you're talking about, kind of expanding not just on a work, but on how you conceive of what these things are. Like, I think that's what's really...
Yeah, I remember the first time I made a zine, which was, I made a stupid project, which was my first project I made out of uni when I was still trying to make performance art. And like it was a show told in 5 different mediums, one of which was a zine, and I did the thing of, you know, cutting a load of stuff out, sticking it down, and then taking it to this corner shop in Streatham and taking it to the guy and being like, "Hi, can you print this up?" And he was like, "Why?" I was like, it's for a project. I'm gonna give it to some people with a mixed CD in a theatre. He was like, "All right, you're like £5, mate." I was like, "Okay." And it's like, it's a thing that I've still got a load of them because like people obviously just thought they weren't worth taking. But like I found it looking back and trying that style and going, oh yeah, zines are all about cutting down and sticking and all that, and just going, so, you know, for me, like, it's like, you know, zines are about self-expression, about what works for you, for the thing you're trying to make. And yeah, like I totally wouldn't try that style now myself. Yeah. It's not to denigrate that style. It works for those people, but for me, it's not how I would want to make a zine for myself. Like as in a piece of art that I've made. Sorry.
I think that style like pays tribute to that really important aspect of zines. So that style of obviously photocopying stuff is the idea that, you know, you could take a zine that someone handed to you, you could photocopy it 100 times and pass it out, you know, and spread these ideas, like obviously through the roots of Riot Girl and like feminism and stuff like that. But obviously there's other stuff there, but yeah, exactly, and using technology in different ways that it wasn't kind of like led for, and even like with like the more like nicer like crafted zines, like my experience of your zines and stuff was like being flogged them at every video game event for like a year. I think John O'Kane was like buying them out of pity, like constantly.
John O'Kane just likes giving me money. He gave me some money at GDC because I showed him a TV remote.
But it's great because you're sharing all the stuff with everyone else. Like, it's fantastic.
But yeah, I still have some boot bags if you want some.
Please.
But yeah, and like something about kind of old technology, like that kind of reminds me a lot of the kind of with the Pico 8 zine, with the whole kind of type-in style, like going back to the kind of...
I think this come from when I learned coding when I was maybe 8 years old or something like that with BASIC, with this old book just with listing on it. And I learned with this, and I think it was like a physical way to learn coding somehow. And I tried to give this feeling to the zine, like for children to... I think it's nice to don't look at a screen to learn coding, to have to be able to touch the code somehow. So it's what I've tried to do with the zine, and I don't think it's just not nostalgic thing. I think really it helps to understand abstraction, to have it on paper, than to have it just on the screen. So that's why I went for this aesthetic and for the paper version of the zine. I also got a PDF that people can print, but I hope they print it, because I think if you are looking to it on the screen, you will not have the same feeling than if you are reading it on paper.
I think it adds a kind of really interesting element to like add a physicality to like a fantasy console. You know, that like Pico 8 is this like completely digital console, but to have these kind of artifacts that we had of like the 80s kind of computer magazine culture kind of recreated for it. It's kind of...
And one thing is nice to in this concept of fantasy console is people like the second or third week the console went public, people were already thinking the hardware. How can I have this a physical version of this virtual console? And it became an obsession, and now it's a reality, I think. Like they've done a Raspberry Pi stuff with it. Or, but I think that it's good to be able to touch things sometimes.
Can I say something?
No. Of course.
I was just... a thought that occurred in between there and there in my head was of... Like one of the qualities of the material zine, of the form zine, is not just the speed and the physicality of it, but of pass this on. Is like, I put this in your hand and you can put it in another's. Previously, when we didn't have computers as a way to email a link to an article, I photocopy this and you to photocopy this, and we're probably stealing from our bosses, and that's all kind of cool as well. And here's this. Pass it on is like a really important part of it to me. I can put it in your hand and you can put it in someone else's.
Yeah. And you can put note on it, like with a pen, with nice, throw it when you're this kind.
Add to it and like build on it as you pass it on. I think is a really interesting thing as well. Is that like kind of refactoring old things into new things. I don't know why that leads
Forms.
to.
Sorry, they got really loud. Wow. The booming voice.
Of course they would have.
What would they have called it?
Determinal.
Oh,
I thought they were
determinal.
just a bunch of drunk French dudes.
So yeah, I mean, encourages like each person to like create, and then you can do this also. You know, like it was like it's like 8 pages. You can make a zine. You know, you can like change my zine and like flip it around and everything. It's super cool.
Which I think like leads quite nicely onto the Klondike zine machine.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that.
Yeah, like.
Should I
Well, you can give a bit of context about it, and then I'll maybe say what I was going to say about it.
give
Or
an introduction of it?
yeah.
Okay, so I absolutely forgot to mention that in the introduction, but I'm a member of the Klondike Collective in France, and we were invited a few months ago, like a while back already, to Screenshake to make kind of our own space. And part of that space was a thing we called the zine machine, which was a thing with, like you had a screen where you could input a title for your zine. I mean, we just like print out a generated zine, depending on that title you put. And so each page was like a generator that one of the members of the collective made. So each zine was unique, but you would find the same kind of illustrations and stuff like that in there. And that was interesting because like literally none of us has ever had any tie to the zine like scene and whatever, and we're like, maybe that's kind of insulting to the people who are used to making zines, to call that a zine machine. but at the same time, it was like this very crafty thing where like everyone has kind of this grunge book that is like very, very ugly, very like, not ugly in the, like in the illustrations and stuff, but it was like very, like misprinted paper, like misaligned stuff. And you had to cut through it to just fold it and whatever. So it was very like do it yourself.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of thinking about when responding to those ideas of like repurposing and passing on, is that the zine machine is kind of really, it's all computer generated, but here is an example of a zine.
Here's an example of that, those zines.
There's loads.
we have a bunch of them. Okay, whatever. I mean, anyway, nobody is gonna see anything on the camera.
Yeah, yes.
But like, I'm gonna just put them here for the people who want to check them out after
This is
after
for
the
the
talk,
people
maybe.
outside watching
Yeah.
on the camera.
You're gonna see like a blank pixel.
This one's called Alas, Poor Yorick.
And yeah, so everyone can put whatever title they want. So we had offensive stuff and whatever. That's, I think, we can avoid that. But yeah.
Yeah, the thing I was about to say was, the kind of, the fact is very, despite being solely to a degree, because, you know, all computer-generated art to a degree is not a sole computer-generated thing. It's created in collaboration with a human. But it's a very hands-on thing for a participant to come and play with the zine machine, because, you know, you've got to choose what to put in, then you get your zine and you've got to cut it out, and like it's kind of is a tutorial on making zines in a kind of really hands-on way, where like kind of the effort of making the content has kind of been taken out of your hands and you're just kind of left with the kind of physical craft side of things, which can be as intimidating in the first place. Going, I don't even know how to fold paper. I can't make a zine.
I hope there's people who like just did that and then went like, okay, I know who to make a zine now, so I'm gonna make my own.
Yeah.
Because it's quite easy, but you don't always like know how to do it. It's just like fold it the right way.
It's the here's free chords, now write a song of zines. It's a zine machine. But, yeah.
I've had a thought, but I have to Google it before I say it. So, Phil.
Okay, I'm quite tired.
Okay.
I've got free drinks down here. Yeah, while Hannah Googles this thought, are there any shout-outs from the audience they want to say to the panel? Not shout-outs, questions. Anyone want to shout out questions from the audience? Or do shout-outs?
Or I can like pick people from the audience and like ask them if they want to talk about stuff, because I can like see like a lot of zine makers and stuff here.
Yeah,
like
there are a lot of zine people in the audience.
One of the things I was going to do was follow on from that thought and say that Adam Dixon and what's his name, and she runs that cool music thing. I'm so bad at names.
Oh, Kaylee.
I'm halfway through. Kaylee and Lee.
Fan club.
Yeah,
Fan
so
club
they run zine workshops at various games events and stuff as well. So that's like the human version of...
At Feral Vector last year and the VNA Pushing Button events, Lee Nichols, Kaylee Mitchum, Kaylee Mitchum and Adam Dixon run this kind of zine making workshop where there's like a little card game you play, which ends up with you given instructions on what content to make, and then it all gets kind of fed into a zine that's made through the whole, like, over the course of the event, and then distributed to anyone who happens to still be around at the end of the event, but put up online as well. And I think, like that kind of playful serendipity adding to like zine workshops and things like the zine machine is really kind of useful for inspiring people.
oh, okay.
And Hannah's found out I can stop ad-libbing.
Yeah, and they're called Born and Bread, but bread, the food stuff. So I went and spoke at this thing called The Story, which is a conference about storytelling that happens in London. And Born and Bred are a collection of young black women who sort of went to college, came back to where they grew up in Peckham, and looked around and went, why is everything so white now? Everyone here seems to be like, wearing the clothes of poor people from the 80s with shaved heads, and I'm pretty sure that this used to be where I could get my my local shop is now this really trendy club and stuff. And they gave this really interesting talk where they were like, but rather than like starting an anti-gentrification march, we thought we'd remake our culture, remember our culture. And they didn't know about zines when they started making cut-out magazines, which they shared, telling the stories of their childhoods growing up as like first-generation kids in Peckham, back when Peckham was a kind of like a much tougher place to be. And they're remembering how awesome Cleopatra was for them, the pop act. Cleopatra, if anyone remembers them.
They were coming at you.
They came at you. There was a great video when they were all in their bedroom and they were bouncing up and down.
This is one solely for UK people.
Anyway, my point being is that like I think there's something quite innate about self-publishing that we come back to as humans, because they had no sense of, they said themselves they had no sense of zine culture before they sort of started making one. And they got together and they cut things out and they put them together, and now they have this kind of collective, and they also run a pirate radio station, and there aren't many young female black voices coming out of Peckham until they started like just sticking their magazine in people, in like hairdressers and around the area and stuff. So I thought that might be a nice touching point as well, like, because we're all coming from a certain background and stuff. The end.
One of my favorite, this is just randomly popping in my head, but one of my favorite like zine memories was at a Maze 2 years ago, and Morgan Kahn, like a really great artist, like she lives in Seattle now. She made a zine over the course of the Maze festival with like drawings and like thoughts on the people's talks and the people she saw and everything, and then printed, like found like a print shop in Berlin and printed like hundreds of them and handed them to everyone. I was like, whoa, my mind is blown.
Yeah, she is dedicated to the zine cause. She's like an amazing zine library of just, yes, my zine library is terrible. It's not even a zine library, it's a shelf. People should make more video game zines so I can have an actual zine library. It's the main reason for this panel.
But I guess back to this idea that you're talking as well of remembering culture and like, you know, like the people who created them and stuff. And making your own culture, exactly, yeah, totally.
Yeah, like recently, like I bought a copy of going back to kind of video game zines, because panel, but touching on that, like I bought a copy of the One Up magazine volume 3 off eBay because someone was selling it, and I've got a load of saved searches for various zines I want. But it's really interesting because it was written around kind of 2005, 2004, and it's kind of captures this moment before the kind of wave of indie that Jonathan Blow supposedly created, and that whole idea of kind of what game culture is now, and but there's all these kind of undercurrents. Like she interviews Billy Mitchell, the guy who did King of Kong, the arsehole in the Stars and Stripes tie, and he says all these kind of quite sexist things to her, and she's kind of like in brackets going, "What a fucking dick," but it's like it's this kind of weird kind of pre this culture that we're in now capturing of it, and like the same with a couple of Fortnite zines are kind of all about kind of the New York game scene, but they're all kind of pre-Baby Castles. And so one of them's all about how basically the New York game scene's kind of dying. And then you look now and you're like, whoa, the New York Game Center, Baby Castles, New York's great. Like in that way, like you do when you don't actually live in New York, and you're just like, oh, look at all these people I follow on Twitter. I
think like one thing that it speaks to, like in connection with like independent games and everything, is the transientness of our culture, in the way that like so much material and stuff could be lost. And even you brought up oneup.com, which I think is really interesting. A lot of like critics got their start there, but also like they had like personal blogs, and you can find the blog of Phil Fish as a student, and it is incredible, but it's also really sweet and endearing and everything. Yeah. And there's all this culture and like all this like really important material, and like not unlike the games and the websites and stuff like free indie games, which is kind of like almost becoming lost in the tide, So I think this is maybe touching on why it's really important for like people like yourself kind of collecting and like holding on to this stuff. I recently bought all of the physical editions of the Gamers Quarter because someone gave me a tip off to a secondhand bookshop in Canada that had them. Someone, I guess.
No, it wasn't. It was. I can't remember the name. Runs Glorious Train Wrecks. It's been Lee Q.
Yeah.
They basically just tweeted me in the middle of the night and like, you should follow this link.
Like,
and
nod, wink,
yeah, it was
wink.
like, they followed it because they were like, I was Googling around and I found this.
He was so excited. I was in the room at the time. There were hysterics.
I mean, it wasn't like the toaster. That's another day. That's another panel. But yeah, like, I think, yeah, that capturing of transients, and I think, again, that feeds into, like, say, like, Paul's work with your zines, where you're capturing the kind of in-progress work of creation and kind of placing that in a kind of, I can't think of the word, I'm very tired. But yeah, you know what I mean, like, in a, I'm just going to say, like a secured form, like it adds a permanence to the kind of transience of game creation itself.
Yeah, in my case, it also, I don't know if that's where, yeah. In my case, it also has a lot to do with like form, because if you show just like screenshots of stuff on your computer, it doesn't have the same effect as if it's like a mysterious zine that you found somewhere. And I feel like just having the detachment from the screen creates much more like, it's present in a way that is different from if it was just like on a Tumblr, you know?
Yeah.
Because I could just like pick these pictures that I like from the NOAA database and put them on Tumblr or on Twitter, but that wouldn't have the same impact, I think, as having them in these tiny booklets that you can have on your shelf.
Yeah, I think I adore the size of your zines. They're so cool because it's like it really feels like kind of peering into something. You kind of
Yeah, I mean that's the thing.
You kind of have to work to see what the picture is sometimes, and I really like that.
Yeah, that's the thing that attracted me with like the idea of making zines is that you have no constraints on like the form. You can just like do a vertical stripe, a horizontal stripe, a square that is as tiny as your nail if you want to. Just the only constraint is you're able to actually craft that.
Yeah.
And because I like to do tiny things and because I like to just work with unusual formats, that's what interests me in like zines.
I am also excited as someone who's written about, but knows nowhere near as much as Pat, on like preservation and conservation of games. And as someone who comes from a performance background, when you work with a totally live medium, you have to think really inventively about how to preserve that. And in certain areas of performance where it's not scripted, especially, where you can't print a script in any way, a script is like code. It exists, but the way that you play a game and the way that you play a play make it different each time. Like Marie, who's the video games curator at the Victoria and Albert Museum, Marie Fulston, says, you know, what is Minecraft? It's a set of code. It's also a thing played on a particular machine, but it's also a culture. It's a billion YouTubers. It's like the games that kids play around Minecraft as well. So like I get quite excited about games as a way of documenting zines as a way of documenting games inventively and of getting in at the way we make things and the way we appreciate things, which are as much the experience of a piece of culture as the artifact.
Yeah, I think there's also the kind of a lot of the kind of really exciting zines that I've bought of late have been from like fans, like legitimate, like some of them are game creators, some of them game scholars, but they are like people responding rather than like people creating along with the game or as part of it. They're like people who have seen a thing and just want to make something along with it and document it and pass that inspiration on that they found out of it.
I think that distance between the inspiration and the creator is so interesting. You know, I mean, this is slightly tangential, but like if you're creating, like say a film, and sometimes like the film director does the soundtrack themselves, that can be really boring because the soundtrack and the film are like totally in sync and stuff. But when the soundtrack is coming from this different perspective, there's that distance there, which creates this interesting dissonance. And so it kind of speaks to, rather than the creator like doing it, that like it's the fans or something, and there's this distance there. Also, I just want to say, I really want to see more games about documenting zines, please. That sounds incredible.
What you're saying is I should make an autobiographical game about living with me and how awful that is.
About collecting, that sounds brilliant.
It would just be like every day Pat would get up, see what came in the post today.
But one project I got is to create a zine about game design, like no code and not dependent of a platform. game design, like board game design, but also video game design. Because I think like people who start doing games, they need to find the information again, and I think there is not enough literature about games and board games in terms of all the terms, like just if you want to find good information about probability and games, it's not so easy to find a good book about that. But this is true for everything. So I got the feeling sometime being a game designer that I spend most of my time trying to find the information, and I would like to share this. So it's a project I got for the future. And I think a zine is very good for this because you don't have to be a book. Like you can write shit on it if you want to.
Yeah, you don't have that like structure of here's the introduction, here's 200 pages before you actually get to the meat of what you're wanting to learn about when you pick that book up. Whereas with like a zine, by nature on the whole, it's like short, punchy, to the point.
Yeah, exactly.
Other words for those things that I said 3 times in a row.
Yeah, I think before we start to wrap it up, should we see if there's 1 or 2 questions?
Yes,
or maybe
I was going to say
zines that people like
10
even.
minutes. Yes. Anyone got any questions? Anyone want to recommend some zines?
Pimp
that people should
zine.
check
This is
out?
your chance to pimp your
Or
zine.
to any members of the audience, bring some zines they want to sell to the panel. Come on. But yeah.
Okay, I mean...
If not, we can just wrap it up.
you can... I was going to ask questions of the audience rather than the questions of someone else. But I mean, I don't know. I was just thinking of a lot of this. Again, we're coming back to these modes of creation and stuff. And one of my favorite little game zines of the last while was Rag Zukin's Cool Tool zine. So I was wondering if you want to say a few words or have any thoughts on the creation and also zines in general.
Yeah,
come on up.
Come on up. There's room on the sofa.
Finally famous.
It's like a This Is Your Life surprise guest there.
So,
You didn't know, Mark, but today we're talking about your zines.
I can't believe I'm on stage with the Ashe.
Treasure it.
So I was thinking about this a little bit in my chair, and I was thinking the thing that really got me interested in zines was just reading some people's things where they're talking about the mundanities of their life, and it's like someone who's talking about I think the first real one I read was someone who was talking about, I tried to start a feminist nightclub in my town because there wasn't anything, there was nowhere to go. And, well, I guess that's not so relevant, but it seemed very much like this person had sat down and they had written, this is what's going on in my life, and I don't know why anyone would care about this, but it's what's happening. And so my Cool Tool zine was I don't think anyone really cares that I'm making this, but I'm going to just sit down and write out everything I'm thinking right now. So Cool Tool is this really excellent game-making tool made by me. It's based on loads of inspiration, but mainly the idea that you draw a game instead of programming it so much. So it's all about making drawing the primary action. Yeah, that's Cool Tool with a K for maximum cool. So the zine, which I didn't actually bring any this time. I brought loads last year, and it was a big mistake. Zines are only just becoming cool thanks to this panel.
Why aren't you riding this wave? you could have bought a house by the time this panel was over if you'd played it right.
I just watched you fail to sell so many boot bags.
I've got tote bags for life. I'm set. Yeah.
So yeah, the Cool Tool thing was actually the first zine. I really wanted to make a zine, but I didn't know what I was going to do it about. And then I think Chris Martins was doing a thing on, I'd like to make a zine about people's creative process and kind of like a dual thing of tell me about what you're making, but also tell me how you're making it so that other people can kind of see that. So I thought, here's a good chance to make a zine. I'll do the making of Cool Tool. So I sat down and I was like, I really hate writing from school, but I'm just going to sit down then, and I don't want the pressure. I'm just going to sit down and whatever I write, that's it, one take. And that's what I've done every time, apart from I can't write number 3 because I'm I sit down and I'm like, oh, I don't know. So I think I'm going to have to take some cues from Laura's talk and just do it again.
That's Zines. Just do it.
Is this Nike sponsored?
Yes.
Oh, excellent. I don't have much more to say about it, but thanks for having me on the sofa.
Thanks for coming on the sofa. Anyone else who'd like to come up and talk about their zines for a few minutes? Just open it out to the audience. Or have questions for the panel. If not, I guess we could Siobhan has a question. Oh, there's a mic.
It's not on.
Hello.
It's not on.
Hello. I'm here.
Oh.
Hi. I wish I could remember the name of the person who's doing this. I've just tried to look, but I can't. Somebody messaged me a while ago because they made a program that allows you to turn twine games into choose your own, like physical choose your own adventure zines. Is that
It's Jerry Bellick.
Choosatron.
Yeah, Jerry Bellick. I think.
Yeah, Choosatron is really cool. And I recently had one of my twine games turned into like a physical thing, and it like turns the links into page numbers and that kind of thing, and it's really cool. And it made me think a lot about how like choose your own adventure books used to be like the most popular thing in the library, and that's the one that everyone picked up, like the Goosebumps choose your own adventure books and that kind of thing. And obviously you don't see those as grown-ups, which is kind of sad as much. And Twine, I think, is kind of turning that into like, it's like the adult choose your own adventure book. But now we've turned choose your own adventure books into choose your own adventure games on a computer, and now we're turning those back into books. And I wondered whether any of you had any thoughts on the way that it's sort of, zines very much are sort of turning the transference of information back from digital to analog, is that the right word, I guess? Or like physical instead, and how you feel that affects all of your work.
I think there's definitely a push away, like with our lives, so mediated through digital technologies. That, I mean, like as I talked about in my talk earlier, like introducing this element of physicality and this element of chance and stuff that the computer and stuff does not allow. And I think definitely people want to have things they can touch and things that like feel real and like things that, you know, yeah, obviously video games are real, but then when you saw the Choosatron and like it made like a printout every time you made a choice, like the little kind of ticker tape would print out like a tiny bit more, and then like the story would be written above, and then you'd make it like you'd insert the way you played the game was like on this physical device, and you'd like choose the numbers for what you wanted to do, and then a ticker tape print out, and that feels so real and cool. Even though like you could just do like a choose your own adventure on the computer easily, the physicalness of it felt like fresh and interesting again.
Yeah, and like, sorry, I was gonna say like the whole action of like the little box with his little face and the buttons and just kind of making the whole interaction kind of. Yes, yeah, Jerry was
won the audience
here.
award at Amaze last year.
I ordered one, but accidentally got it sent to a house I hadn't lived in for about 2 years. I never went and got it, and I think it's just God knows where it is
now. Is it
now.
on Tor Road? Is it in Forest
No,
Hill?
it's in just Oakdale Road in Streatham.
Fucking hell. I had a thought when you were talking about that, which is a really interesting thought, and I personally am interested in all these people's zines because they are a different way of looking and a different way of reading. Like, I was thinking when you're like, Twine game to choose your own adventure, I was like, that's really interesting, but also as a writer, that's entirely different. Like, the amount of writing you can put into a Twine passage is vastly different to the amount of writing that a person will feel comfortable with on a page. The pacing for a Twine game is incredibly different to the pacing that I would enjoy in a Choose Your Own Adventure book. So I guess like I'm really excited about different forms as ways of looking and ways of reading at the same questions. And that finally makes me think of a really amazing blog post by Robert Yang, which was about games. Most of the games in the world are games you will never play, and they exist as thoughts in your head, almost like thought experiments. You sort of know the genre and you sort of know the story, and you can imagine how it would play out, and you've maybe got information from other parts of the world in more detail about that game. Yeah, and they're just as valuable in that experience as those thought experiments, as those things that exist in our head that I'm probably never going to play Dark Souls, but I understand it as a cultural phenomenon and as a thought experiment. Different ways of reading and different ways of looking become really interesting and exciting to me as a way of expressing all of the stories we have about the world.
I also think This don't work. You work, yeah. I also think in a zine, the fact to print it, like from the number 1 to the number 4 of the Pico 8 zine, I've changed the paper, and because I was not happy as a result, so I was trying to find something. Because I really, it's like the typography, like the choice of paper, the cover, the kind of the way it's printed, really changed totally the feeling you got to the object, and this is something we can't have on a computer. Okay, you can have a MacBook Pro and whatever, but you will not touch it, you will not feel it. The smell, just the smell of it when you receive a full box of zine, there is something happen, I think. Maybe it's fetishism. Probably it's fetishism.
Can I just want to offer my own kind of concluding thoughts.
Yeah. Go for it.
I mean, because just something we touched on a few minutes ago, which I thought was really interesting, which is this idea of all the zines that you've made, which are lying in your house, kind of unsold and kind of pushed. And I think that's actually super awesome and super sweet, you know? No, seriously, there's
Do you want a box of 70 Be a Public zines?
I think it's great. I think it's a celebration of this thing that you made, and you didn't make them to make a few €100 or whatever. You made them for the thing itself, and I think it's cool that even Jason Warher, for example, who made this super awesome game called Diamond Trust of London, he published it on the Nintendo DS, and so the minimum print run for a Nintendo DS game is 20,000. So he has 15,000 cartridges of his game in his house, which I think is amazing. And I also my house is full of not full of. I have 10 and I made a dozen book versions of Curtain. And I could probably, if I set up a website, I could sell them and post them out and stuff, but I'm not really bothered, you know? I think I'm just happy.
I've got one of those.
Sorry?
I've got one of those.
Pat has one of the other two. My mother has the other one, probably.
Who's a bigger fan, me or your mum?
But I think that's great, you know? I think it's it's a celebration of, the creation and stuff, you know? And it's a testament. Yeah. But, do clear them out at some point.
Yeah, well, it's me and George made games for people because we wanted a book of folk games. We didn't make it because we were this would be a great way to get people playing Boop. We were just we should just do this. And so we sat in a cafe and we argued over some folk game rules for a couple of days, and then we made it. And yeah, I think that's kind of
it. Also actually contains some really nice writing about vote games and stuff.
Yeah, Holly's essay and it's really good.
Holly's essay is amazing. Your stuff is also good, but yeah.
I should wrap it up before I start self-deprecating too much on the stage, because it is also 6 o'clock, and I think we have to clear out so they can set up for the awards.
But you should come and get some of these.
Yeah, fun. Oh, do either of you have any final thoughts? You're fine with your final thoughts. Cool. Yeah. So I think Arnaud's got some zines with him, or Hannah's got a lot of zines. She needs the weight letting down in her bag for the journey home. I've got some. Have you got any, Paul or Laura?
I mean, you can see the ones that are generated, but don't take them because they belong to people in the room. And I will have my own tiny zines with me in the evening when I go get my coat, because it's gonna get chill and they're in the coat. So I don't have them yet, but later.
So yeah, if any of you would like to look or buy any of these zines, come and do that while we pack away. And thanks for coming to this panel. Thanks. Thanks to everyone for agreeing to be on it.
Thanks, Pat.
Thanks for enduring my tiredness.